I do get a lot of people saying, well, I don't know about this journey. It's called the journey of transformation. I don't know about this journey because when I look at the future, as you said, I have to risk. It seems I have to risk everything I value, which might be my career, might be finances, might be my family. It seems like a risk. It doesn't look like there's anything called financial economy at the other end. Like, I don't know where people pick this up about spirituality, but this idea that I'll be poor right at the end.
Hi everyone, warm welcome to Quantum Shift, a space where leadership meets spirit. I'm Saloni Singh, your host, a life coach for CEOs, conscious leaders, and entrepreneurs who are ready to connect with their spiritual core and lead from their higher consciousness and purpose. I am so thrilled today, and you can see that we are at a different set. We are not in Delhi in our usual set, rather we are in Mumbai at a new set. And there is a very good purpose because of that we are here. I'm so thrilled for my first guest interview. And when I thought of interviewing guests, the first person that came to my mind was my guest, Leon Vanderpol. And the reason I really wanted to interview Leon as my first guest, because not just because he's a spiritual leader that I look up to, but also because his teachings and his work and his mentorship has played an immense role in my spiritual journey. So here we are with our first guest, Leon Vanderpol. Welcome to the show, Leon.
Oh, a big thank you to you. Quite an honor to be your first guest of this, to launch this. And everything you're speaking about leadership and consciousness, I'm just like, feel my heart already just going, yay.
Yay.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Thank you for being here, Leon.
You're very welcome.
So for all the people who don't know about Leon, I would like to share a few things about the wonderful human being he is. So the first thing is that what I love about Leon's work, he's an author of the book, A Shift in Being. And when I talk to people about being, spirituality, they think it's a woo-woo concept. And they feel it's so about something which is invisible, formless, while Leon had literally decoded in his book, A Shift in Being, how there are simple ways. And when we practice these ways, we can connect more and more with our inner core and essence. And I just love this practical approach. And don't we all want something practical in this world? So that's why I absolutely love Leon's work. Leon is a founder and CEO of the Center for Transformational Coaching. And he has been a mentor to so many coaches, and he works with leaders globally. So without any ado, let's begin this beautiful conversation with Leon Vanderpol.
Yeah, so good to be here.
Yeah. Yes, Leon. So the reason I started this podcast, Leon, was because of a leader I was working with. So this leader, when he started coaching with me, he used to say in the very first conversation, he said, Saloni, I feel there are two worlds I live in. So this world is spiritual world where I wake up in the morning, I meditate, I am so calm, so relaxed, and then I go in the traffic. And the moment I reach in office, I'm already irritated. And it feels like the office politics, the pressure of targets, achieving and doing, it just puts me completely in another world. And it seems like that these two worlds never gonna meet. If I try to, be more spiritual, go to my spiritual practices, it feels like I have to leave everything and all my financial dreams, and I have big dreams, and everything I have to leave. And these, I cannot have both. Yeah. And most of my work with this leader was about really co-creating this new understanding that is this really two different worlds? Or what if we are not able to see something which is so obvious that we are spiritual beings and we are operating in this business, corporate, practical, material world from that spirit. So I want to know from you, what is your views on this, on spiritual leadership, on how to bridge the gap between spirituality and leadership?
Yeah, it's such a big question. Yeah. There's so many dimensions to the answer to that question. So with our conversation today, we can begin to kind of unpack that question and the different dimensions that people have to consider in it. I think your story to start was a telling story. This idea of there being two worlds, and these two worlds at times don't feel like they naturally fit together, they bump up against each other. that the expectations or demands are just different,
Yeah.
right? And of course, when you do progress in personal understanding of the nature of life and reality, you don't see two worlds anymore. You just see one endless world in a variety, infinite variety of variations. But very often when people are beginning, you might say an early stage movement towards a deeper understanding of themselves and life, they're kind of looking at it as two worlds.
Right.
And there's a lot of information out there that kind of reinforces this idea that they don't really fit. I do get a lot of people saying, well, I don't know about this journey. It's called the journey of transformation. I don't know about this journey because when I look at the future, as you said, I have to risk. It seems I have to risk everything I value, which might be my career, might be finances, might be my family. It seems like a risk. It doesn't look like there's anything called financial economy at the other end. Like, I don't know where people pick this up about spirituality, but this idea that I'll be poor,
Yeah.
right, at the end, right?
Yeah.
But that's an image.
Yeah.
You have that, you've had that, right?
Yeah. I have to become a monk or
Yeah.
go on Himalayas to meditate.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? So that whole idea, it's a falsity,
Yeah.
but those are the images that we hold. But what happens is that creates a kind of resistance,
Yes.
a resistance to integrating the two worlds. Because here's the reality. There is a giving up. There is, in other words, there is a kind of a real letting go that has to happen. And it can feel like a bit of a dying of values, beliefs, possibly ambitions, desires, dreams, so that something can replace those. But here's what happens is that what replaces those will encompass those, but in a very different kind of way. They become recontextualized as the mind awakens to these higher potentials and realities. Everything recontextualizes. So there's going to be a feeling, and it's just a feeling of a kind of dissolution of certain things for a while. And yes, it will appear that things are inherently at risk in that dissolution. But what happens is, I like that word reconfiguring or recalibrating. It's got to recalibrate or reconfigure itself into a new kind of paradigm or structure in which all of it then can fit again. Let's put it that way. It all comes kind of back into it. It's not a loss, but that's how people perceive it. This idea, I'm going to lose something I value, but it's not a loss. It's a reconfiguring of it in the light of a new understanding of self and a new understanding of the nature of life and its potentials.
Okay, so if we really want to simplify it, because a lot of time what I hear is that, oh, it seems like a concept. It seems like something like in my mind I'm creating, but how does it feel like when I really go and live in this world? So let's say there's a CEO or any professional for that matter. It could be a corporate executive, anybody, an artist or let's say designer, whoever, and professional. And they say, okay, how does practically this look like? If you can simplify in a daily life, how will this, you mentioned the word reconfiguring or reintegrating. How does that look like?
In practical terms?
Practical, yes.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because it's actually a function of the mind, right? It's not a function of, say, blocks on a table where I can just move them in different places, or like a Rubik's Cube where I can just quickly see the different color patterns emerge. It's a reconfiguring of mind. And as you know, mind is this invisible thing. Yeah?
Yes.
So what it can feel like, and this is the reality of it, is that coming back to this idea of disintegration, there has to be a kind of disintegration of the current structures. Your podcast is about elevating leadership consciousness.
Yes.
But what people don't understand is that the pathway to elevating consciousness first requires a kind of a deconstruction or a dissolution of the current belief system of thought and value. That's where people get locked. Because from a young age, they're taught, this is the way to look at life. This is the way to succeed. This is what leadership means. This is what success looks like. A lot of it is external. We know this, right? And we are held to certain standards by our teams, our organizations, our families. I mean, our families can be one of the biggest challenges in the sense that the expectations placed upon the child from youth right through continue to be at play well into adulthood. And the grip of all of this has kind of helped people lock into their belief and value system and live from it. I'll give you a quick example. I heard an interview with Elton John.
Okay.
the singer, the famous singer.
Yeah.
Everybody knows who he is.
Yeah.
And in that, and this was in his 70s, he said, I'm still trying to please my father. Now that's huge, isn't it? This idea that a man with all the accolades, all the success, all the earthly wealth and honors that can come his way, an incredibly talented, if not genius individual, is still deeply motivated by what happened in his childhood, in his relationship with his father, who was not the most supportive figure, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
CEOs are not immune to this.
Absolutely.
Leaders are not immune to this. They might think they are, but there are these deep operating structures that are alive in all of us that have been built up since youth, that have become a system of thought, a worldview, and a way that kind of, you could say, it forms our system of consciousness,
Right.
right? And we lock into it. And this is not good or bad. It's not right or wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's an easy thing to say, well, look at that, let's judge that
Yeah.
because I'm ambitious,
Yeah.
or because I want to drive something towards $1 million or $10 million or whatever. No, that's not it. But what happens is that if you really want to elevate consciousness, you have to really recode the inner operating system. Kind of like that analogy of the computer, right? We're not just making changes to, like, we're not just going from iOS 4.3 to 4.6. Most leadership development is incremental change built on the prevailing system of consciousness of that leader. They're going from 4.0 to 4.2, then 4.2 to 4.4. Very few are concerned with a rewrite of the operating system itself, right? Because why would I do that? Everything's good. It's all working. Look at my success. Look at everything I've got. I want to improve so I can do this one thing better. I want to grow a little bit in my abilities, but I am not interested in looking so deeply within myself at what's really driving me, what really motivates me, what has been the structural influences of my inner operating system. I don't really want to look at that. So I won't.
Yeah.
But I can learn, I can still grow, I can improve certain things. There's not like a limit, but there's not this idea that what would it look like to rewrite the inner operating system? That is frightening for most. Anyone, leaders or not, but leaders who are successful are some of the ones that are most likely to resist that journey because, again, life is good. Why would I rock the boat? Why would I be interested in that? Because this journey into higher levels of personal consciousness does require us to really examine the influences that give rise to our everyday experience, our motivations, our ambitions, our desires, our dreams. And it doesn't mean we throw them all away, but we begin to make very conscious decisions about where that came from. And really, do I want to maintain that as I grow into this new level of consciousness? So there will be this rewiring, recoding that has to happen. And this is the piece leaders, again, as I said earlier, will resist because it looks risky. Can I give you an example?
Sure.
Yeah. So I had one client, and he was a very senior executive in a very large multi-business conglomerate. And he was kind of at the center of a lot of very powerful, strong, ambitious CEOs. And he was the one that was kind of tasked with getting all of these various business CEOs on the very same page. He had one interesting kind of challenge, and that was every time he would come into contact with one of these very powerful, very assertive, often very knowing individuals, he felt like he became a child again. Like that inner part of himself would kind of shrink back. And he found that he couldn't really assert as he wanted to, or really speak to his ideas and truth. He would acquiesce out of a very deep kind of fear, concern of what it would mean to stand fully as himself in face of this kind of aggressiveness. Very quickly, these groups, these individuals too, learned that he was that kind of guy. He would kind of back down. All they had to do was assert. With strength, power, and authority, and that was the end of him, right? He would kind of go back. He really struggled with this for a long time. So we did some work on that, kind of the idea of the inner child, because this is where we've got to go, right? That little boy in him was coming out. And so through some conversations, it was revealed that he had, from a very young age, been taught to absolutely respect, if not fear, authority. Okay, so what happens then? That was taught to him in the household. Your father, mother must be revered, respected, perhaps even feared. God certainly must be feared, right? Of course. Teachers, same thing, respected, revered, possibly feared. And it just went on and on like that. This idea that authority must be feared and must be given the space. So now, come full circle, he's 45 years old, unbelievably bright individual, highly capable, confident. And every time he's coming into a meeting where he meets assertion of authority, he becomes a small boy again. Okay, so what's the work? Now that we've revealed this and we understand this, what's the work? Because there's some deep inner child work that has to happen. I would say there's healing that has to happen. Healing elevates consciousness by nature of the releasing of the grip of those wounds of the self or wounds of the mind kind of thing, right? And this was his answer when I laid it on the table and said, are you ready to do the healing work? This was his answer, word for word. Can we do it next year?
Oh my goodness.
In a sense, I'm too busy now. There's too much on my plate now. It's too risky now. Can we do it next year? Well, guess what? Next year never, ever came. He was not willing to, again, risk it all, what feels like risking it all, right? Because you have to go so deep inside of yourself, and who knows where that will lead. It might just start with this childhood thing, and who knows what else it'll lead to. Might have me look at my whole life, have me questioning why I made the decisions I made, how I even ended up here, kind of thing. Like, that's the potential risk. So better I look at it next year, or in this case, not at all, and just continue on my minor upgrades, right? My 4.2 to 4.4 kind of upgrades, so I can do my job a little bit better, right?
Lots is coming up for me. So few things I heard, which was very interesting that you mentioned, that it's not just about going from 4.0 to 4.1, 2 or 3, because it's still, what I'm hearing is the foundation is the level of consciousness. So a couple of things I want to unpack here, Leon, is what does, if somebody is listening and they're just beginning this journey of really becoming self-aware, really becoming where they are at the consciousness level, how can somebody understand what is consciousness? How do they know, okay, what consciousness level I am, and how will it look like, not just an upgrade from 4.1 to 4.3, rather a completely different dimension, what we're talking about. Maybe we call it also fifth dimension sometimes, at a different 5, 6, 7, whatever the level is. And the other thing also I want to unpack, one belief like you mentioned about, like, fearing authority, or fearing, like, okay, what if I stir my status quo boat, and I don't want to do that because maybe there is so much underneath. What other, beliefs might be there? I have, of course, heard a lot of different beliefs, like the one you mentioned. Once I was working with the CEO, and he said that extremely wealthy, extremely successful, like everybody just, so much recognition he had, and lots of accolades he had. But at the end of the day, he said that I'm still not able to make my father happy. And my whole life, that's what he realizes, about proving myself to my father. And that's it. And it was really sad to hear that. And as you mentioned, that so much healing is required. And nobody knows it. From the outside, life looked great. All the trophies.
Very good at masking.
Yes, masking. That's right.
Very, very good.
So let's unpack these two things. Like, what does these beliefs, what kind of beliefs are there? What does it do? And how does this different level of consciousness look like?
Well, let's start with the first one about levels of consciousness, because that's actually a really esoteric question that's difficult for people to get their head around. So I don't know if there's one resource that was valuable for me, and it was Dr. David Hawkins' work.
Absolutely,
Right, and it's still the kind of Bible that I turn to when people say, hey, tell me about this thing called consciousness or levels of consciousness. And what is each level like? What I love about the book is his absolute fascinating insight into all levels. So just for the audience listening, it's a series of levels of consciousness. Now, he puts them in a kind of linear continuum of consciousness, from the lowest level of shame to the highest levels of enlightenment. But in reality, we can think of consciousness like a field or a dimension or a paradigm. Let's put it that way. That's an easier way. And consciousness seems to expand rather than, say, move up a level.
Right.
But I think this image of it being on a continuum and being leveled is one that's relatively easy for us to grasp. Wonderful teaching aid. So one of his books, Power versus Force, introduces it, but his other book, which is, I believe, Transcending the Levels of Consciousness, he describes each level. Some of the earlier levels, particularly lower states of consciousness, driven by very, let's call them primal human impulses towards greed, towards anger, towards ambition. You know, he describes those very well, and most of us can relate to them. The other higher levels that some of us have never yet touched become a little bit more, again, esoteric, but he does a beautiful job of describing them. So if people want to know, they say, well, where am I within all of this consciousness? It can help to dive in there and just kind of read into that and get a sense, okay, this feels about like where I am in my life. And many of these levels, as you know, are very empowering, positive, like willingness, responsibility, like these kind of levels, the desire to learn, the things that we see in everyday leadership and everyday life that help us grow and succeed and, if not survive, if not thrive. These kind of mid-range levels are the ones that we see every day and that everybody understands how they work. In fact, I would say that most successful organizations are built on the kind of levels of consciousness that we might say are the middle ground. Most people's aspirations to grow and develop themselves in ways that are meaningful are kind of the middle ground. Right. What is less understood are these higher levels. Let's call them the levels of love, joy, enlightenment. Like those higher levels of consciousness, those are the ones that are poorly understood because we have very few teachers of them. And they're very poorly understood in the leadership context, where I think there are very few, if any, teachers of them. And therefore what happens is people don't understand them. They're too far out there. They don't make sense. Love?
Yeah.
I'll give you another small story about love. So I was coaching a CEO in a small, it's called a medium-sized organization. It was an engineering organization. So everybody there has the engineering mind, right? Kind of left brain mind. The CEO, though, was definitely on his journey of inner transformation and had worked with me. I think it was about a 5 or 6 year period that I worked with him on kind of elevating his own level of consciousness. And at one point, he decided to name, his core value. And his core value was, I want to be love. I want to be integrity. And I want to be transparency.
Right.
But I don't necessarily know what it means to be that. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to put it on a plaque on the wall in the office and say that we should all be this. But it's a whole different thing, as you know, to be the essence of love, to be the essence of integrity. But he wanted to know it. He wanted to know it. So even, I'll give you the name of the company, it was Enlighten. So E-N, and then L-I-T was love, integrity, transparency, and then E-N. Right? Great little name for the organization. The values kind of embedded. We had meetings with his senior leadership. And the response was, love? Love. You want us to love our customers.
Yes.
You could just see all the engineers kind of like heads tilted a bit to the left going, love? What? Right? We can care for our customers. We can do that. I'm not sure about this love thing.
Yeah.
And he would stand up to, no, but the reality is I don't think any of them, including him, and maybe not even myself, understood what it meant to lead an organization in the consciousness of love, which is different than the feeling of love. The consciousness of love is an intelligence field. It's a paradigm. And every paradigm has its own built-in reality, or I should say every level of consciousness has its own built-in reality because each one is a different paradigm.
Right.
So if you inhabit that paradigm, you get it. But if there's another paradigm that's, let's say, 3 or 4 levels of consciousness above where you normally operate, that just seems like you're talking about some alien life form experience that I cannot grasp and really don't want to have anything to do with. So this is one of the innate challenges in introducing consciousness to people, is it seems esoteric. But the reality is every one of us embodies a certain level of consciousness. And through dedication towards certain, let's say, spiritual practices or inner growth practices, we can indeed experience more expansive levels of consciousness, right up to love and even beyond, and everything still works in them. There's still businesses that can be built. There's still
Right.
finances that come forward. There's still economy. All of that exists, but how does it exist? And that's the hard part to explain to
Yes,
people until you
yes.
take them there. And once they've touched it and tasted a little bit of it, they might be able to say, okay, I begin to see now through that lens of that consciousness. And I can see how things might work.
So I want to ask something here, Leon. How will it look like in practical daily life of a CEO, a leader, a professional executive from a person who is really just hustling and they are so worried or, just really bogged down by the numbers and bottom line and targets to achieve, and the pressure is from above is very
Yes.
high and they are giving
Yes.
pressure to their juniors. So how will it look different if they are actually vibrating at a different level of consciousness,
Well,
which we are talking
exactly,
about?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's like two different worlds. I mean, you were already pointing to it. The hustle
Yeah.
equals what? Stress.
Stress.
An immense amount of stress. And stress just becomes this energy that they're giving off constantly. Again, another guy I know would sit and talk with him. His leg was bouncing up and down constantly, and it gave off stress. Even just sitting with him as a leader, I became stressed in the same conference room sitting with the gentleman, right? Because he's just vibrating with stress. Everybody's picking it all up. They go home, they don't know why they're so tight, but they've been with this gentleman all day, kind of thing. Stress is a big one. It's often driven by what? Underlying fear, right? Underlying fear that something they desire to have happen won't happen in the way they want it to happen. That something negative will ultimately come of something, and therefore there's a desire to make sure that fear doesn't transpire in reality. So stress, ambition, all of that pushing, driving nature can come from these deep underlying structures. On the other side, let's say we've got this higher vibrating executive. It doesn't need to be love, but just let's say there's this movement towards a more expansive state of consciousness. And the first thing you'll notice is what I call spaciousness. That stress, those fear structures and patterns have just been kind of released. They live in a much more spacious, open, allowing kind of way. Life just kind of moves differently for them. And it's all still happening, but it's just there's a much greater flow to it. They don't operate out of fear. And when you're with them, you can feel that kind of spaciousness, expansion. There's more trust. They're far less controlling individuals. The desire to micromanage, to control, to make sure that your stamp of approval is on everything, to make sure that you've looked over everything everybody's done because nobody does it as well as I do it, right? That's of that nature, that world. And then there's this other world where there's much more trust, much more giving of power to other people and moving them forward through inspiration and motivation just by the nature of their being. There's not this hanging fear of punishment if you do something wrong, right? With the other world, there's often this sense of like, if I make a mistake, punishment will come my way. Worse, I'll be fired, I'll be let go of. In this other world, there's no sense of that. And mistakes are just looked at as always learning opportunities. Yes, too many mistakes can become problematic. Obviously, if you can't fulfill your role, that's one thing. You might not be in the right place. But the individual is not becoming constricted and irritated or frustrated by your mistakes, right? Mistakes are just contextualized in a larger process of life. And what is that? We're all here to learn and grow. And how else do we learn and grow, right? It just becomes contextualized immediately by a much broader understanding of the nature of life and the purpose of organizational life, like why organizations exist to begin with. Is it to make money? Is it to make this widget? Is it to become the biggest, the best, the brightest, the most successful? Or is there something beyond what Frederick Laloux in re-engineering organizations called evolutionary purpose, right? If you are tapped into evolutionary purpose of an organization, then everybody's behavior becomes contextualized in the light of a much larger purpose of existence of the organization. So just being with these two different types of leaders is so immensely different and satisfying for people who are working in these organizations because it pulls forth their greater talents and abilities and aspirations. They're not caught up in fear and worry and concern. So I'm not saying good work doesn't come of those other states. Entire organizations have been built
Absolutely.
out of great drive, ambition, even kind of controlling fear-led management. Great organizations, many Wall Street organizations, I'm sure kind of found their way through leadership of this nature. But what we're talking about is that advancing level.
And that's
Yeah.
why I think still we are going in the same way in the business world. What I'm hearing is this leader we are talking about who is leading with a higher consciousness level, there's a less need to control, less need to have more power and create fear-driven, results.
Right.
Rather, there is more of acceptance at a deeper level, acceptance, even though they are also evolving and creating results, of
Oh,
course,
yes.
creating
Absolutely.
empires and
Yes.
but still they're coming from a different space.
Right.
That's what I'm hearing. So I think it's a perfect time to talk about what kind of belief system a leader, let's talk about this leader who is leading with a higher consciousness level, what kind of belief system they are operating from versus what is our norm. So norm
Right.
is like this conditioned mind which says like, oh, if I don't have authority and if I don't have power, then people tell me people will take advantage of me, my
Right.
team won't work, and then, I will not succeed. And there is an external driven mind basically. We are always driven by external achievement. How many people really following me, listening to me, and how much control I have.
Right.
That's the norm.
Yes, that is the norm.
That's the
Right.
norm, right?
And often those people too can still at times be very inspiring.
Yeah.
They can still be very motivating. They kind of
Yes.
oscillate at times between two kinds of worlds.
Yeah.
But if you were to open up that inner operating system, you would see many coding that is based on some kind of fear.
Fear,
Again, of
yes.
something that they desire to have happen, not happening in a way that they
Right.
desire for it to happen.
Yes.
Right? Some little wavelength of fear. And as human beings, let alone leaders, I think we underestimate the degree to which our fear-based thought patterns lead. We underestimate it. I mean, if you really look at it each and every day. So what are the thought patterns and beliefs of the more expansive leader then? They tend to really rest on this notion, I think, of trust and acceptance, right? What underlies that? Okay, thoughts like, all things are happening exactly as they need to happen. I mean, that's a pretty powerful thought, isn't it?
Yes.
That allows all things to be as they are. All things are happening exactly as they need to happen.
And I would like to pause here as well. It's a big one.
It's a big one, right?
Because
Yeah.
imagine, okay, let's imagine a scenario which is a common business scenario, or organization going through some kind of change, major change, crisis, or maybe some part of some team is not working. And then you're talking about this newer belief system where everything is happening exactly as it's supposed to happen right
Yes.
now. How do leaders come to this space? Because maybe everybody's panicking, and the leader itself, of course,
Well,
they are
right.
also panicking.
Well, they
right?
might be, depending which leader you're speaking about,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Why would panic come in? Because of fear.
Because
Again,
of fear.
what's the thought that underlies the fear that's giving rise to the panic? I will lose my job. I will lose respect in the industry. The organization will lose share value. Stockholders, shareholders will not be pleased with it. Like whatever, you name that thought.
Yeah.
And there's this deep underlying fear structure that is constantly at play, motivating that person into behavior.
Right.
Right? And some of that behavior, again, could turn things around. That behavior could create great new products, could lead the most brilliant marketing campaign they've ever seen.
Yeah.
Right? But it's still driven at the core level by a fear-based thought. And then you have to look at the other one and say, all things are happening exactly as they need to. That doesn't mean things can't learn, can't grow, can't change, can't move direct. It doesn't mean that. It means there's a trust, which also means the trust in things when they break down. And that's the biggest one for most people. One of the biggest myths of life is that everything is on a continuous, never-ending upward cycle of getting better and growing. We don't take into account that all things, too, kind of come to natural ends.
Right.
And let's look at the biggest picture possible. You look at all the organizations operating simultaneously across the entire planet, and we say, well, we want to uplift the consciousness of all organizations. That means that those organizations which currently operate on lower levels of consciousness, fear-based structures of thought, are either going to what? Die away by the natural process of evolutionary change, or they're going to have to evolve to become a
Right.
more higher conscious organization.
Right.
And we see the organizations collapse. Oh, there were 4,500 business bankruptcies last year. It was the economy's fault.
Yes.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Really? Was it really the economy's fault, right?
Yeah.
We don't look at the nature of the consciousness of the organization and say, well, how about this? How about the consciousness was no longer what this earth is needing? How about it collapsed because of the weight of that? But that's not the conversation we have. It's not even what leaders look at. But when you become more expansive in your own awareness, you begin to accept that idea that things must crumble, fade away in order for something to be rebirthed that is of a higher nature, even in ourselves as individuals and in organizations, in societies. We can watch entire nations crumble under the weight of the consciousness of systems that no longer work, right?
Yes. So it seems like, of course, I completely believe that, yes, the whole universe, the consciousness is evolving naturally. If we look at our children, I mean, I always, it seems like they're so emotionally aware, their consciousness level is already so ahead of us. So do you think that is an essential reason that organizations and individuals need to start look into like where they are operating from, what is their consciousness level? Is that what you think is the reason we should look into spirituality and this work?
Well, I don't think there are any shoulds. I guess
Okay.
that's another, talk about a belief system, right? There's another
Right.
one right there. I have no sense that we should do anything or that leaders
Okay.
should do anything.
Okay.
I am only ever interested in the conversation with leaders who desire to experience something. And that experience that they're looking for is, well, what would it be like to live, work, play at a higher level of personal consciousness? And therefore, again, in my organization, what might the impact of that be? So I'm always looking at where's the desire? Where's the desire? And then opening that up. Because once you start imposing shoulds, in that moment, you're going to get resistance against people who are not necessarily ready for those conversations. Here's the trust piece. I trust that everybody will find their way to the conversation they need to be having to grow in a way that they're ready for. There's a belief, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Wonderful
right,
one.
right. It's a really good one, right? But that means that I just have to allow everybody to move in their own way. Now, if you have an organization like that too, you recognize as a CEO or a leader, that I probably shouldn't be imposing
Yes.
my own ideas of advanced consciousness leadership upon others if they're not ready for it. And this is a conversation I have frequently with people. They're saying, well, Leon, you should take your work into organizations. And I say, well, what if the organization's not actually ready for it, but the top leader is? I'm not interested in imposition of thought patterns upon people. But if I can inspire them through conversations like this to say, hey, maybe there's something in me that is greater than perhaps I've ever known before. And what would it be like to tap into that? And am I willing to make some sacrifice, perhaps risk things? Then I'm there for that conversation.
That's such a beautiful point, and I totally love that, Leon. And reason, because I hear from so many people, oh, maybe I'm ready to do this work, but my family is not, or my team is not. And usually this is the conversation I have. Okay, if you have a desire, let's see what happens when you start to embody this, and allow space for others if they want to also ask you, look, how does it look like?
How does it look like? Exactly. That's the conversation I'm interested in having at this point in time. It may come a time when we notice that organizations kind of en masse are starting to have people ready for these conversations around what it looks like to really create organizations based on higher states of consciousness and awareness. And we can begin to bring it. I think we're very, very early still in these conversational states. And with kind of examples, like Frederick Laloux's book, again, it had an impact on me because he was the first person to sort of say, hey, there's even a level of organization that exists beyond what we see today a lot of, which is the value-based organization. He said, there's another organization that's even beyond that, and here's what it looks like. And in his book, he posits a number of best practices that organizations can do to implement this. And there's a whole movement that's come out of it, globally speaking, around, let's become Teal. Let's do these, implement these best practices and we'll become a Teal organization. Without the recognition that you don't become Teal unless you're Teal. The leader must. And he mentions this in his book, somewhere near the back, like a little caveat. Oh, by the way, we recognize that the consciousness of the leader absolutely matters in the ability to sustain, not implement, sustain these best practices, right? And make them have a real difference so that we create Teal. So right now, my feeling is we've got a few people who may be ready to really understand what it looks like to create Teal organizations. But for the most part, most human beings are not there yet. So we can introduce best practices without the expectation that you become Teal. Like just
Okay.
introduce the best practices and
Yeah.
see how your organization does with it. Like one of them is autonomy. Let's say that we introduce autonomy. We give teams just absolute autonomy. That pyramid just goes flat as can be, right? And then we give absolute autonomy to teams to make their own decisions. Well, for many organizations, that's just a nightmare thought. Like it's all going to fall apart if we go absolute autonomy. But we think this Teal idea is good. So we'll implement it, but we'll keep it just a little bit like this, right? They'll kind of hedge our bets a little bit, and we'll have some reporting lines that are maintained. We won't go absolute autonomy because that requires perhaps something our people aren't ready for.
What's the name of the book you mentioned?
Reinventing Organizations, Frederick Laloux.
Right.
Yeah, so he's got these levels of organizational possibility. And it's a fantastic book to read for that and to understand some best practices that organizations can implement. The challenge, again, is that without leaders who are that, who understand it not just from a book that they read, but a living embodiment of Teal, which is kind of this leader of evolutionary purpose, who understands the greater nature of life and the way it works at the highest levels. We don't have many of those folks yet. So it's a big kind of experiment to look at organizations that way.
Yeah. So what I hear and what I see in my work, and a lot of coaches, I think, feel that way. There are many leaders who are or becoming aware. So they might come to a coach and say, I can see that right now the conditioning I have, right now the ideologies I have, it is creating a lot of stress and anxiety, and it is fear driven. So my thought process, the way I'm working is fear driven, but I don't know whether the other way will work or not.
Exactly.
That's their fear.
I'm afraid of that.
I'm afraid of that.
Yeah.
I remember I was working with a young startup founder, very young, young guy, and we were having this conversation, and he's like, "This conversation is amazing, Saloni, but will I be able to even operate?
Right.
I'm creating this, startup. It's been 7 years. We're about to launch, and all my, love and heart, heart
everything is in
sweat
there,
has
right.
gone into that.
Exactly.
If I'm not driven, my motivation is all fear. Like if I do not work enough, if I do not hustle, then I will not be able to create the enterprise I want to create.
Exactly.
And if I take away that fear, because we are working on his stress and anxiety and how he can just, tune into this trust into himself and the universal, consciousness, how will I be driven? So
that's the piece, isn't it?
That's the piece.
What is the motivator when you take away those underlying structures like fear or the need for validation or for the need to be seen as successful or the need to be financially secure, if not absolutely wealthy? Those deep structures, which are very primal human impulses that are often reinforced by our social conditioning when we're young.
Absolutely.
If that becomes our primary motivator, and there's still what I call creativity in there, because every human being is an immensely creative spark of the universe, let's put it that way. So you have on top of all of that kind of primal stuff, this very advanced, beautiful thing called creativity. And people have ideas and they want to make them happen and make them fly in this world, right? So it's an interesting mix when you put this kind of the genius of creativity, and I want to bring this to the world, and you mix that in with, but if I'm not this person, then how do I make that happen? But what is this you're asking about? You're asking about fearlessness. Now, fearlessness, if you take away fear, the removal of fear is what love is. If you want to say, what is love? Love is the absence, the absolute absence of fear.
Yeah.
Well, then what motivates? Well, love. Well, wait, that feeling thing you're talking about? No, love is an intelligence. It's not just an emotion that I feel towards somebody or something. It's an intelligence field. It's a paradigm of intelligence. And when you are in love, it moves through you as an incredible field of intelligence and infinite creativity. It's going to give you creativity beyond your human imagination.
Yes.
When you tap into it. It's going to augment any gifts, talents, passions that you already possess. It will simply augment that and show you a way to bring things to life without fear. It will show you how it's done. And you understand, like, so they're like, how do I do this? It's just like really perplexing. It's like, you do it and it shows you, like it shows you the way. And so my own experience too as a CEO was very much that. Like I just rested in the assumption, like what if I was to create an organization based fully on my creative gifts and talents and woven with this desire to simply manifest love in all its shapes and forms as we grow this organization. Like what if I could do that? Now there's a journey in there for me to go on. It doesn't mean that day one I was standing free and clear of fear. That's absurd. I had to go on my journey to clear that out, my journey into trust, my journey into understanding how that intelligence moves through me so that I could actually manifest an organization in this way. It's never dull. It's one of the most exciting journeys I can even imagine being on, where my highest creative talents meet the world's most expansive state of consciousness, and those come together in a creative endeavor called a business. Like what it's awesome. Like it's beyond belief awesome. There's no boringness about it. It's endlessly inventive. It brings in all kinds of surprises. It can be sometimes a little exhausting when I let my human self take over a bit too much, or if I do let fear find its way in, sure, exhaustion comes in. But the goodness of it, the rightness of it is so real that, why wouldn't I want to do that? Like what else is there to do? Like more fear? No, that's no fun anymore. It's not of any interest. And that's the piece too. Like it has to, for some people, come to the point where they finally say, I'm tired of that.
Yes, yes. I think that's so important. And it's quite a roller coaster journey. That's how I see. If I look at my own journey, it's been almost now 2 decades when I thought of from a doctor to becoming a coach. I realized that as a doctor, I had like literally no self-awareness. It was just work, work, home, eat, sleep, work, home. It was just like this. It was only after becoming coach, I started to realize, okay, what am I thinking? What is driving me? And yes, there were times when I'm so rooted in pure love for my work and there is no how-tos and things are just coming through, and then suddenly I would see some shiny marketing idea, okay, I can do this, and become fear-driven and go that way, and then get exhausted and stressed out and like, okay, no.
That sounds about right.
This is not what I wanted. Come back. So it's like this is the kind of roller coaster journey I have never seen or met somebody. And I would want to ask you, how has been your journey? Who would say, yeah, once I started and it was like the smooth ride. But I think we all fall into these fear-driven, conditioned ideas and beliefs, old beliefs, and we can see that. The awareness is there, so we start to see that, oh, okay, I'm again being driven by that fear. And yes, there is another way because I've already tasted that.
Right.
Yeah.
And what is that other way? Like pure fearlessness.
Yes.
Is love. That's the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So I would love to wrap this episode, Leon. This has been a wonderful conversation with some practical ways. So anybody who is listening to us and they have this desire to, I'm on this spiritual journey and I want to see how can I not operate from this fear-based hustle mindset versus how can I start to, work on my consciousness level, grow in my spiritual journey.
Yeah.
What could be some simple practical ways that they can start with?
Well, what we haven't talked about today, which is a whole nother conversation,
Yes.
is around this idea of being level awareness.
Yeah.
Like the big question, who am I being?
Right.
And what does it mean to be that, to be the living embodiment of that,
Yes.
right? There's I would say this is the edge of leadership today. We're starting to see, Harvard Business Review and some other publications beginning to speak to this idea of being centered or being led awareness of self.
Right.
This is a field that is new for people. We start with the question, who do you choose to be now in life, in this moment? Then there's a choice. Okay, maybe I choose to be courageous, confident, caring, compassionate, loving, whatever it may be. This is who I choose to be. But that's still just the choice. It's not that I am instantly, in all ways, the living embodiment of that choice. It's the journey into it so that you are the living embodiment of that choice that is a kind of transformational journey because it requires you to look at everything that stands in the way of you being the living embodiment of that choice. So I'm bringing this as a practical tip because anybody at any point in their journey can ask the question, who do I choose to be? in this moment, right? Who do I choose to be? Now, one of the ways that I look at it from a spiritual perspective, because that question doesn't mean you have to give a spiritual answer. It doesn't mean you have to be on a spiritual journey at all.
Okay.
Often the spiritual side of things emerges as people go on it. It's not always where they begin. And you can begin anytime. Let's say I choose to be confidence in the face of authority.
Right.
I choose to be myself. What does that mean? There's a journey into it so that you can stand as you are as confidence. I am the living embodiment of confidence. Maybe not arrogance, but
Yeah.
true self-esteem. There's a journey into that. And every meeting, every conversation, every action can first be prefaced with, am I being that which I desire to be? Am I being confidence? Am I being courage? Am I being whatever it may be, creative?
Right.
Okay. If you want to take it to the spiritual side of things, because some people are ready for that, then that choice in being might be a spiritual value. And we've talked about love. It could talk about compassion. It could talk about caring. Let's say I choose to be compassionate much more in my work. I choose to be the living embodiment of compassion. That's my highest spiritual value, and I want to be that wherever I go. In all that I do, I am the living embodiment of compassion. So that choice then begins a journey, and it is a journey, into what would it look like for you to be that. And again, it requires you to look at everything in you that stands in the way of being compassion. And there's a lot, quite often, that stands in the way. Right? But that's the journey. Until one day you can stand free and clear and say, I am that which I say I value. I'm not just giving it lip service anymore. So the identification of a value or a desired state of being, and then the journey to simply embody that, is the most effective way for anybody to begin expanding their levels of consciousness into new territory, so to speak.
I love that. Also, I want to add and ask you as well, Leon, when we notice that we are not being that, I think it's very important not to judge ourselves. Because then we go into guilt and shame.
Right.
And that's a very common thing as human beings we do.
Oh, yeah.
So rather
Absolutely.
than judging, be love to ourselves as
Right.
well in that moment, isn't it?
Yeah, especially when we start to, and this will come in everybody's journey, when we start to become public about it.
Yes.
When we start to become public, in other words, to be known for that which we state we value.
Yeah.
It's like, I choose to be the embodiment of love, and look at that.
Yeah.
That me in that meeting was an angry, irritating old man kind of thing. Like shame, guilt can absolutely come in. Embarrassment, right?
Yeah,
it comes in. You
And
can't
even
judge
others
that.
can tell you. I remember my daughter telling me, I was working with parents as parent coach, and once I raised my voice, and you can't do that, mom. You are a parent coach.
Exactly.
Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm doing my best to be the embodiment of pure unconditional love. And yes, sometimes I can also lose it.
Yeah.
And I have to be compassionate towards
Deeply
myself for those
compassionate.
times.
It gives rise to this one last thought on a video I saw of the teacher Ram Dass. Must have been back in the 60s. It was a black and white video of him.
Okay.
And he's talking to a group of students, followers, and he says very openly to them, I was just in the back, and I was really irritated and angry with one of the support staff. And here I have to come out here and talk to all of you. But he said, here's the thing. Even in the middle of me being angry and irritated with the support staff, there was a little part of me that was saying, oh, look, there's Ram Dass getting angry again. Whee! How fun, right? That sense of detaching and to be able to see ourselves and just look at it and go, there's me getting angry again. Whee! How fun. Kind of says it all, right?
I love that. And the lightheartedness.
The lightheartedness comes in.
So important because this spiritual growth journey, in no way or form, I think, is a serious stuff.
Yeah.
It's the lightheartedness and this loving approach, I think, is so
That's
important.
It gives rise to a lightness of being. Talk about the hallmark of an evolutionary leader, of an advanced consciousness, is a lightness of being.
Oh my God, that's such a beautiful way, I think, to really wrap up this episode about bringing this lightness of being, and which naturally start to come when we are embodying all these higher spiritual values, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Leon, for being on this episode. And I'm so happy for the conversation we had.
This was really good.
And I
Thank you.
believe all our listeners enjoyed as much as we both did. Thank you so much for listening to us. And I would love to hear your feedbacks, your questions, anything that you would like to share with us from this episode. Thank you.